It's story
So
time.
we're sitting down, we're making the outline for this, and I can just hear this sound and coming over my house into my neighbor's yard. It's this huge swarm of bees, like huge, massive, black out the sun, and they
Like bee movie Swarm of Bees?
I've not seen Bee Movie,
Oh,
but I
okay.
assume it's like that. It
Okay,
was a
alright.
horror movie for me. And like, if the first thing I can think of is they're going to land in my yard. What am I going to do about this? Right. And so they're flying over and they over my house, over the fence into my neighbor's yard. And they had this huge maple tree and they landed there. And like, all I'm thinking during this time is when I was growing up, I had this big tree and these bees like flew into it, and this squirrel got into the nest when they were like swarming like that, and the squirrel got stung to death.
Oh,
And then there was like this
good
jogger
God.
that was like running down
Oh.
the street, and the swarm of bees like spills out of a yard into the street and like stings them all up. And
The jogger too?
the jogger too, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so then we had to like call the fire department. They blast the bees with the hose, and they put
Oh.
the hose into the tree. This is like a true story, like totally true story. And like as I'm watching these bees in my neighbor's yard, I'm wondering like, are they going to swarm? Do I need to like get the hose out for myself? Do we call somebody? But then, that's complicated right now because
Right.
coronavirus. And so like all this stuff is going on in my head. And I'm
Yeah.
like, what am I going to do? Because this is a really complicated situation. Like
It
all
is.
these bees, and I've got little kids, and like, I
And
just
it's your
felt so
neighbor's
powerless.
backyard, not yours.
What am I gonna do? Like, if she comes home and sees me standing in the yard with
She's gonna
like
call
a
the
hose,
cops. I know.
exactly. Like, what are you doing in my yard, right? So that's the story of the bees. As we were getting ready for this, are we ready to start the show?
We are. That's a tough afternoon for you, Mr. Breen.
I know, right?
So you may be wondering why we're talking about bees in the neighbor yards to start this off. And really, it all has everything to do with the idea of controlling one's backyard.
Oh man, yeah, dude. What's going on in your own backyard, right?
Hello, and welcome to Storytime with the Historist, the podcast for world history students, teachers, and enthusiasts. It's world history, but told our way. On this episode today, the Armenian Genocide,
Ugh.
which is so, like, you can't even compare it to a swarm of bees, but it's just awful. That's all I can say. It's just awful.
It is. It's an awful
horrible.
one. And it's one of those stories in the 20th century that doesn't get a lot of play. It gets overshadowed because
It
the 20th
does.
century is full of so many awful horror
Yeah.
stories. And it's one we came across from our primary source that we used
Yeah.
for this episode, A Problem from Hell, America in the Age of Genocide by Samantha Power. And she opens up this century of awfulness of genocide with
Mhm.
this story of what took place inside of the Ottoman Empire in 1915. So, kind of give us some real quick background. Like, what is the Armenian Genocide real quick? How many people died? Like, what are we talking about? What's the meat
Well,
of this thing?
1915 is the year we're going to call it the start of the genocide, though I would argue it probably happened a little bit sooner, but that's the date we'll go with. And really what happens is you have the Turkish state, the Turkish government, which is part of the Ottoman Empire, systematically killing 1 million Armenians. It's that simple.
And so like immediately my head goes to the same place probably most of our listeners head go to,
Mhm.
like the Holocaust, right?
Yeah, not nearly as industrialized as the Holocaust. I don't think it was as well organized as the Holocaust. But if you're able to kill 1 million people within a year, for the Turkish government or the Ottomans, it was effective. And that's what makes it so horrific.
Yeah. And so when you're saying not industrial, you're like talking like hand by hand.
Yeah,
Right? Like
we're talking
DIY genocide. Oh man.
Yeah. We'll get into
That's
it more a
pretty-
little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's crazy about that, you talked about the Turkish government being part of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
And that would kind of take, if you're an astute listener to this podcast or a good reader, detailed reader of world history, you
Mhm.
know that the Ottoman Empire had a long history of religious tolerance.
Yeah,
Even
they
though
did.
it's a Muslim majority empire, they respected all the people of the book, all the Jewish people and the Christians and various sects of Islam. Like
Mhm.
everybody was treated favorably. You could have your own community, a millet.
Yeah.
And inside of your millet, maybe you have to pay something like the Jizya tax or something like
Right.
that. But, you got to have religious autonomy. So we had this multi-ethnic empire during this time that straddles both Europe and Asia. And for the longest time period, hundreds of years, they were conflict free when it came to all these different ethnicities. And it wasn't really until the 1800s
Mhm.
when we start to see nationalism and we start to see national autonomy in places like Austria-Hungary, which is bumps right up against the border
Right.
of the Ottoman Empire. And we all know about the Black Hand and the murders that set off World
World
War
War
One.
One, yeah.
And that has a connection here, right? Because of the fact that had it not been for the Black Hand and some of these other genocidal acts, and the fact that the Ottoman Empire was so weak, we talked about
Mhm.
the Crimean War last
Right.
week in Snake Eyes, that the Ottomans were really at a it's that perfect moment in history of like insecurity, nationalism,
Hmm.
and war that creates like a blanket to allow a tragedy like this to occur.
Yeah, I mean, and the Ottomans were a multinational, empire, multi-ethnic empire, and they had seen what had gone on with Austria-Hungary when Austria gave Hungary its own sovereignty and its own ruler, and there were issues within the Austro-Hungarian Empire of other groups wanting their independence, like Serbia, and the Ottomans see the same thing kind of happening within their empire, is that these groups who are not Ottoman per se, and they're not necessarily Muslim, some of them want their independence, and that really comes to a head in 1914 when Russia enters the war. Poor choice to enter the war, but hey, if you're Russia, that's what you do.
Right.
Um, Poor choices.
Bad choices.
So when Russia enters the war and declares war on the Ottoman Empire on Turkey in 1914, what they actually do is they do encourage the Armenians, which is a sizable group in the Ottoman Empire, to rise up and revolt, hoping that that would weaken the Ottomans in Turkey and then Russia could easily take them over, which we know didn't happen because
No,
no, not Russia.
no, they
And
can't get anything
they
done.
can't do anything. And a few Armenians did take up and revolt. They did, without a doubt. That's true. But it was a very, very small percentage of the Armenians, because most of the Armenians supported Istanbul and Turkey.
It's a
But
national,
yeah,
it's war. I mean, it's World War One.
that
Yeah.
that's their home. But unfortunately, even a few rising up and rebelling is going to give impetus to a group within the Turkish government as justification for the actions which they're about to commit.
Right. And there's a famous issuing of a threat, essentially, is what it
Yeah.
is in the New York Times during this time period, right? Where the interior minister, this guy named Talat, and we're going to come back to Talat here multiple times throughout this episode, but he basically says that there's no room for Armenian Christians in
Hmm.
Turkey, and that supporters of the Armenian people and all Armenians in general should clear out. I mean,
Yeah.
that's about as big a threat as you can get to,
Yeah.
right? And he's saying that these Armenians are going to, quote, attempt to destroy the peace and security of the Ottoman state. I mean, so ominous,
Yeah.
but it's like kind of like that shot across the bow. Like, we're going to do something to you guys. Get out.
And they do. I mean, it starts with in April of 1915, it starts by the rounding up of 250 Armenian intellectuals, and they are systematically rounded up and executed. But then it goes on from Istanbul, it goes to the other eastern provinces of Turkey, and pretty much very quickly it involves all of Turkey and getting rid of the Armenians in Turkey. And they will do it through mass deportations. They will do it through, executions. Thousands, if not tens of thousands, die from starvation or disease as they have these forced marches out to the deserts of Syria. And so within a very small amount of time, you do have 1 million Armenians who are killed.
Jeez, man. And I found something actually when I was looking through Problem from Hell, where Samantha Power kind of links this idea of rounding these people up and forcing them out into the desert as
Mhm.
this would be kind of the vehicle. Since this is an industrial murder, she finds this proclamation
Mhm.
that by the government that basically lays out why the Armenians need to go, but also creates the cover for committing the genocide. So
Mhm.
here, check this out. It says, this is from June 1915. It's an official proclamation. It reads, our Armenian fellow countrymen, because they have attempted to destroy the peace and security of the Ottoman state, have to be sent away to places which have been prepared in the interior, and a literal obedience to the following orders in a categorical manner is accordingly enjoined upon all Ottomans. 1. With the exception of the sick, all Armenians are obliged to leave within 5 days from the date of this proclamation. Although they are free to carry with them on their journey the articles of their movable property which they desire, they are forbidden to sell their land and their extra effects, or to leave them here and there with other people. I mean,
So
this
that's
proclamation just reads like, hey, we're going to walk you out into the desert and kill you.
yeah, that's
Don't bring your stuff. Don't
yeah.
even worry about it.
That is formalized BS for it's
Yeah.
over. Yeah.
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 And you talk about this idea of this being formalized, and uh, it totally ruins the idea of cover. We'll get to that in a second.
Oh yeah.
But there's a guy, there's a character who emerges in one of these
Mm-hmm.
forced marches that becomes integral to this story. So talk to me about Soghomon Talarian.
He was, I mean, he was just a regular Armenian citizen living in Turkey. And he, unfortunately, from his town of Erzincan, was deported along with 20,000 other people who lived in that town. And they were going to be marched to the interior, as Talat and the proclamation had said. Now, along this march, unfortunately, what happened is that his two sisters were raped by the very people who were supposed to protect their convoy. He saw his brother's head get split open through the use of an axe, and then his mother was shot, and he actually was hurt. He was like hit from behind and left for dead, but he didn't die. But that he is going to play a much bigger role in this Armenian genocide later on in the story, unfortunately.
So we'll hang on to that name,
But
Talarian.
I think he's important because I think his story is just the microcosm for everything else. I think his story represents what happens to almost, the 1 million Armenians who were killed in the same process.
Right. Yeah. It humanizes this, right? Stalin very famously said, one death is a tragedy, 1 million is a statistic.
Right.
And having somebody for whom we can kind of link this story to is really important. Now, even as all this was going on, the thing is that the Ottoman government actively was working to cover this up, like right from Jump Street. And unfortunately, a lot of the Allied powers who were fighting against the Ottomans during World War I, they're kind of complicit in this as well.
And that's true of any genocide. You have nations who know it's happening and still complicit because it's not in their best interest.
Right. It's not in their backyard. Yeah. It's not. It's so, and they don't, this idea of sovereignty is really important here. So we have guys like Sir Edward Grey, who's part of the Home Office in the British government, saying, quote, there's no direct knowledge, and quote, a massacre on all sides, and there's no crimes that we can find. And he's saying this at the same time that we had these forced marches out into the desert. And sure, on May 24th, 1915, the Allied powers do have a joint declaration where they decry, quote, crimes against humanity and civilization, which is the first time that term's ever used. And they do pledge to hold the Young Turks and their agents and anybody else involved in the genocide directly accountable and responsible for these actions. There's nothing that really takes place.
No, it's like, first of all, your Russian accent is way better than your English accent. I'm not gonna lie there. Sorry,
but my high. Well, if I was doing the Cockney one,
you do have like the working class Liverpool, Manchester accent. Yeah,
every man, I'm an every man.
But yeah, it's this whole proclamation and declaration. It sounds good on paper, but that's all it really is. We've heard like the joke in the past when the UN, wants to get people to stop something, they send a very sternly worded letter, which whoever receives it tears it up or burns it and throws it away, and it has about that much of an impact. And the same thing happens here.
Don't make me come in there.
Yeah, right.
Just like, yeah. I mean, and just to give our listeners some context on how like toothless this is, there's this declaration is made, and all these like everybody's like hemming and hawing about what could they do. And mind you, we're at a time of war when people are gassing each other and blasting each other to bits all across Europe, and so it's not like there's a lot of restraint in humanity at this moment in time. This series of events, these calamities, get pushed off the front page by the sinking of the war. And that totally steals all the headlines. And now all of a sudden people are up in arms about the death of, hundreds, which is still tragic, but hundreds of civilians. Meanwhile, you've got tens and hundreds of thousands of civilians in Armenia being killed. And so, while we see in like March of 1915, the New York Times will run a series of headlines that'll talk about massacres and slaughters and atrocities. And, on October 7th, after most of the killing has taken place, there'll be a huge banner headline that says, 800,000 Armenians counted destroyed. And in December, there'll be another banner headline that reads, millions of Armenians killed or in exile. The reality is that there's not a lot of action, and it doesn't take much. I mean, there's this guy, Jizlal Munif Bey, who's a Turkish consul, who says like, yeah, we did kill some people, and yeah, we did, some things happened essentially, but we caught a bunch of Armenians red-handed. And, any sort of news about women and children being killed is essentially fake news if we were to pull something from our time period. And if there were women and children killed, they were dragged into the same by the husbands and the brothers and the sons of these Armenian, men. And, it's just collateral damage.
Yeah, it's because it comes under the umbrella of World War I. Other countries are too busy dealing with issues they feel are more linked to them. This doesn't concern them. This is not their issue. We got to fight the war, and we got to win the war. And the war does eventually end in 1918. And at that time, you have guys like Talat Pasha, who's probably the most instrumental in this genocide, who flee Turkey. They know, because Britain takes control of Turkey. And so once the war ends and the abuses are seen by the British, right, even though this has already been out there in the United States and Woodrow Wilson knew about it and Britain knew about it in France, nothing is really done until 1918, when the British see the evidence of these massacres, of this genocide, and they decide they are going to act. They're not going to let this go by the wayside or give anybody, quote, a free pass. And they do prosecute a couple of people, but it's minuscule prosecution. We've got one police commander in Istanbul who's given like 15 years of hard labor, and then Kemal Bey, 15 years. Kemal Bey, who was the lieutenant governor of Istanbul at the time, he was executed.
Okay, well, I'm not happy about somebody dying, but okay, so that's pretty good. Who else?
That's it.
You said
that's where it stops.
Two guys,
and not even the two guys most instrumental in orchestrating the genocide. It's
and
two
one
guys.
of those guys has to break rocks. I mean, hard labor. That's like the equivalent of making license plates in today, robocalls for the Bloomberg campaign or something like that. That is insane to me that two people get held responsible. We know like guys like Henry Morgenthau, the American ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, was sending back these telegrams saying like there's race murder underway, and we know. And this guy Talat Pasha is saying stuff like it's too hard to differentiate from the guilty from the innocent. The innocent today could be the guilty tomorrow, so we had to take matters into. They're on record.
I know. Two guys, Matt, two guys. This is, however, how we're going to get back to our character, not our character, but we talked about Solomon Tellerian, and we're going to get back to him. Remember, you guys, he's the one who suffered so much abuse. His brother was killed with an axe and everything else. He plays another part in this story, and that is because only two people were prosecuted for this unbelievable genocide that kills 1 million. He can't deal with it. He's like, this cannot be. We cannot have this. If the government and the international community are going to do nothing, then I am going to do something.
There was rape, there was murder, there was pillaging. There are massacres. Someone's got to do something. So this guy Tellerian jumps into action. What does he do? He's got a letter writing campaign. He's a slacktivist. He's out there on Twitter.
Well, and what ends up happening is Talat Pasha ends up in Berlin, right? I don't know. What is it with Germany? Seriously. It's Germany or Argentina, which are totally connected. So that's another story. But anyway, in 1921, Talat Pasha is walking down the streets in Berlin, and Tellerian comes up behind him, puts a pistol to his head, and fires.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So he gets his revenge against like the head.
Oh, he does. And I can't imagine the people in Berlin obviously have no idea what's going on. They don't know who Tellerian is. They probably don't even know who Talat Pasha is. And all of a sudden they see some guy who's summarily executed in the streets of Berlin. So of course they're jumping on the guy with the gun. Like they're beating them and all this. And what does Tellerian say, Matt?
He says like, I'm foreigner, he foreigner, this not hurt Germany, this not involve you, right? I don't think that's Armenian.
No.
That accent. That's just like that's
That
white
yeah.
guy doing
Yeah.
accents. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's my dad doing accents at the dinner table. But yeah, no, and you know what? He's kind of got a point.
He
This
does.
does the rest of the world is
Ignoring. Yeah,
they've washed their hands of
washing
it.
their hands, because now they don't want to do anything, because they want to be as isolated as they possibly can. They want to get as far away from World War I as possible. They don't want to get involved in other people's affairs, because that's what, one of the reasons we have World War I. So they're just going to wash their hands and they're going to walk away from this and hope it never happens again, which we know that is not how the story goes.
No, yeah. I mean, there's the Treaty of Sevres and the Treaty of Lausanne, and both of those treaties are with the British and the Turkish state, because the Ottoman Empire is gone. And that basically just gives access to oil so that
Right.
these states can have a leg up in the next arms race of the 20th century. And, it's just this really cynical sort of way of dealing with this. And I wish we could say that this was the last time, this was the first and last time that
Yeah,
this happened. But the 20th century is just littered with events where
it's riddled. Yeah.
states just turn a blind eye, like, not my yard, not my problem.
Problem. Yeah, I mean, even though this Armenian genocide does have some positive, effects, like Raphael Lemkin, who is a Polish Jew, he's a lawyer, and he is just horrified by the fact that this is happening. He's actually instrumental in getting the term genocide formalized for the mass killing of a specific group of people. And we know now it takes until after the Holocaust, okay, for this to actually take effect. And we've got the United Nations with the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, where we do get a formal definition of genocide, and we do get international laws saying that if you are committing a genocide or complicit in genocide and you're a member of the UN, we're coming after you. But like you said, it's kind of earlier when you referenced the proclamation or the harshly worded letter. It doesn't work.
Right. Yeah.
We have
No.
we have dozens of genocides after 1951, dozens from countries who are part of the UN, and very few people ever get prosecuted for committing the crimes.
Yeah, you've got the Hutus and the Tutsis
Yeah, Rwanda.
in Rwanda. You've got the Bosnian Muslims in Serbia. Both of those events unfortunately take place during the Clinton administration.
Right.
And we dedicate the Holocaust Museum with the words "Never Again" during one of the worst days of the Rwandan genocide.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like, okay, yeah, but that was still 30 years ago. We've moved past that as humanity. But even last year, the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar,
Yeah.
who were victims of genocide and ethnic cleansing and extermination, and the person who directed the state, Aung San Suu Kyi, was a Nobel Peace Laureate.
Nice.
I mean, the complicated
Nice.
nature of these events and how countries are just so willing to turn a blind eye is maddening. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
and then even after all these things happen, then you also get this like rewriting of history oftentimes, right?
Mhm.
States and people don't want to take responsibility for these
No.
actions because they're so awful.
Yeah. Well, and really what it comes down to, and the whole theme of this that we've talked about, is that it's not my backyard, and it has to deal with sovereignty. Nations are, any nation are very reluctant to get involved in issues that deal with a specific country and that country's people.
Right.
Like with Hitler and the Holocaust, I think one of the reasons, and the countries didn't act right away, which I don't even get started on that, but that you did see more involvement is because Hitler was committing these crimes against people in foreign nations that weren't Germany. And therefore
Right.
it's easier to say, oh, you can't do this, and then therefore go after them. Nations have a really hard time, for whatever reason, getting involved in a country who's targeting their own people, right?
Right.
The Rwanda genocide targeting their own people, with Kosovo and dealing with their own people. And it's this idea that we shy away from things that could affect another country's sovereignty. I think part of the reason why is because they don't want other nations coming into their country if
Right.
something happens in the future. So
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we have a hard enough time in this country dealing with our own
right.
history of genocide and human rights abuses, from, segregation to slavery to, very famously, the genocidal actions of the American Indian Wars in
Right.
the 19th century. And, I think that really kind of puts a nail in all of this, and really just like, in order for these things to go away, in order for them to be gone, Samantha Power ends her book A Problem from Hell by talking about, like, we need to open our eyes to the things
Yeah.
that are around us, and it's uncomfortable, and it's tragic, and it's horrible, which I think is a pretty understated word.
Yeah.
But it's something that we have to be open to, and we have to remember these things have happened in the past, so of
Right.
course they can happen in the future.
And I
Right?
think the message that we've got to take away is there are going to be times you have to go into your neighbor's backyard and fix a problem that you know is legit, and it has to be done
Nice. Yeah.
regardless
Taking
of
it
the consequences. Yeah.
full circle there. All right. And that, everybody, is the story of the Armenian Genocide. So thank you very, very much for listening to us today. We've had, I don't want to say fun. We've tackled
not
another
fun.
uplifting topic here on Storytime with the Historists. If you want to get into our back catalog or follow us on Spotify, subscribe on iTunes, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, you can see all the other wonderful stories that we've told in the past. They're all tragic. I'm just kidding. There's some really good stuff in there. But make sure you share this podcast with your friends, tell people about it, write a review. That's the best way to help people find us. And a real quick thank you to Anchor. Anchor is the platform that we're using to get this out to everybody now. It took us about a year, but we're finally set up.
There. Yep.
So big ups to Anchor. If you got your own podcasting ideas, check them out. Anchor.fm.
Thanks again for joining, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye.